Joshua 5, Joshua 6. I want to share a message with you called "The Battle is the Lord's." And we're all in a battle. Every single one of us are in some sort of battle taking place. It's spiritual warfare constantly taking place. You know, whether you don't like to admit it or not, I mean, we was talking in the youth about, is a video game good or is a video game bad, you know? And it's no matter what it is, and TV shows, everything, it seems like everything in this world, there's some sort of spiritual warfare taking place. Ephesians 6:12 says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. So we're in a battle. If you're saved, there is a battle taking place. And the thing that we need to remember about a battle, if I try to roll up my sleeves and I try to fight the battle myself, I'm going to lose. The battle is God's. The battle's not ours. We can't win by our might. We can't win by our strength. We can't win by our ability. We can't win even joining together. It's got to be through the Lord that we have battle. And that we're going to have victory in the battle. Now, we read here in Joshua 6, and you've heard this preached probably many times, but we see a couple of things here by way of introduction is we see Joshua. Well, Joshua was one of two men of military age during this time when they left Egypt. It was Joshua and Caleb. And they were two that left as slaves, but they ended up entering the promised land. And Joshua was a great military leader, a great commander. And it says even throughout history that military leaders tried to emulate Joshua and be more like him and try to emulate the way, what a strategic military leader that he really was and his leadership. But no matter how good a military leader Joshua was, he relied on God. And you know, we got to realize no matter how much of a prayer warrior you are, no matter how much you study and read your Bible, it don't matter how God has blessed us, it matters that the battle is His and we need Him and we constantly need Him. God is looking for just our availability, not our ability. You know, we can have all the ability in the world or we can have no ability. The battle is going to be His. I want you to think about Jericho. Jericho is 5 miles west of the Jordan, 7 miles northwest of the Dead Sea, and it's a fortified city. It's surrounded by walls, and it seems like a place that's just impenetrable. It's a place that it's nothing like anything that we can think about today. If you look in Joshua 2, in verse number 15, it says that, talking about Rahab, and it says, she let them down by a cord through the windows, for her house was upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. Her house was upon the wall. I mean, this is a big wall. This isn't no normal, this isn't like a border wall, I guess you hear Trump talk about. I mean, this is a big wall, a fortified city. I mean, it's a width that could hold a house. It's a type and that's the type of wall surrounding Jericho. So the battle is the Lord's. And this battle that takes place here at Jericho looks like a place that you just couldn't penetrate. There ain't no way that you could get into with a house on this place, how thick it was, and how big these walls were. But the battle is the Lord's, and no matter what it is. And I'm thankful that Joshua had those markers like we mentioned this morning, and how he could probably lean back and look back and say, man, God's done that time and time again. I'm just going to obey Him. It might look foolish what we're doing, but we're just going to obey Him and see Him, let Him give us the victory. I want to show you 3 things here this evening about the victory. I want to look at Joshua 6 and verse number 2, and I want to show you number 1 is the promised victories. We have promised victories. God sent an angel to Joshua. We read about that at the end of chapter number 5. He sent an angel and he gave them the city. He done promised them the city. Now you look at that city, and you think about a city that had a house on the walls and how thick these walls were and how the walls were guarded. But God had done promised them a victory. In verse number 2 it says, the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. The Lord said, I give into thine hand Jericho. In other words, here you go. I've given you the city. The Lord done gave it to him. You may say, well, they've never fought. That's true. But the angel of the Lord came down and said, I have given you Jericho. And the battle was already won before the battle ever took place. God has already promised victory. But I'll tell you, for each and every one of us, God has already promised us victory. And we just need to accept it. You know, so too many times, what we would be like Joshua here, and we'd hear that the Lord's promised us victory. We'd sit and wring our hands and worry and bite our nails so quick and say, my gosh, how are we going to take that city? What are we going to do? How can we win? But Joshua took God at his word. And God said, I promised you the city. And he took the city. It's a promised victory. In 2 Chronicles 20:15, it says, be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Exodus 14:13, Moses said to the people, fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Deuteronomy 20 verse number 1 says, be not afraid of them, for the Lord thy God is with thee. 1 Samuel 17:47 says, the battle is the Lord's, he will give unto you thine hand. 2 Chronicles 32:7 says, be strong and courageous, be not afraid or dismayed. With him is the arm of flesh, and with us is the Lord our God to help us fight our battles. The Lord is here to help you fight your battles. See, Joshua knew that the Lord had done promised him victory, and the battle was his. I was reading a book, and I don't read much at all, but I was reading a book, and it's called Circle Maker, and it's by Mark Batterson. This person gave me a book, and I put off reading it for the longest time, but I started reading that book. And I'll tell you, it really will make you change your thoughts on prayers and how God can answer those prayers. But in that book, he's praying for land for his church. This guy named Mark Batterson, he's up near Washington, D.C., and he's praying for land for his church. And he's been praying for it for quite some time. But he heard the Lord tell him, it seemed like in his spirit, the Lord told him this, stop praying for it and start praising me for it. He said, stop praying for it and start praising me for it. And here's what he says in that book. He says, true faith doesn't celebrate after the miracle happens, as if it has already happened. In other words, what is there to celebrate after you've already had a victory? If you really believe God's going to do something, you celebrate before it ever happens. That sounds crazy. But one of the verses we read that was quoted this evening was, having faith is the substance of those things hoped for. You got some substance. You have some feeling that God's going to come through. You truly believe. And here's what he says. He says, true faith celebrates before the miracle happens as if it has already happened. Because you know that God is going to deliver on his promise. God has already given us promises, and he will deliver us. And that's what that book talks about. It talks about how we just need to quit waiting until something happens and celebrate it. But true faith celebrates and believes God will do what he says he's going to do. I was just thinking about that upcoming tent revival, tent meeting coming up. If we truly pray and we truly believe God is going to do something, it ain't worth waiting. We don't need to wait till after he does something to then celebrate, but we need to celebrate who God is right now and start really believing that he will do something. I mean, what kind of faith do we truly have? I'll tell you, me as a Christian, when I read that, I need to celebrate before it happens. I was like, my gosh, I don't know if I've really got true faith. That's not even faith if you celebrate after it happens. I got to believe it's going to happen. Hebrews 11:6 says, but without faith, it's impossible to please him. You can't have faith. Without that faith, you can't please him. And he says you can't celebrate after, you've got to celebrate before it takes place. And I really believe that's what Joshua did. He took God at his word, and God had promised him the victory, and he said, well, God, if you're going to promise it, I'm just going to believe it. And he just believed it. He believed God's going to do it, and he did it. Number one, we see a promised victory, that God promises victory. But don't you know that Joshua, number two, had past victories? We see number one, promised victory, but number two, past victories. If you'll hold your spot in Joshua and turn to Exodus 17, Joshua had some past victories. In Exodus 17, not only what we talked about this morning with the Jordan and setting up that memorial and doing what God told them to do. But in Exodus 17, verse 11, talking about Joshua and Moses here, they're fighting a battle against Amalek. And let's start reading at verse number 11. It says, it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he had laid it down his hands, Amalek prevailed. So every time Moses' hands are up, he's winning. They're winning the battle. But every time his hand went down, Amalek started prevailing. Now, what kind of battle's going on here? When Moses' hands are up, they're winning. When they're going down, they're losing. That's a spiritual battle. That ain't a real battle. It's a battle. There's a battle going on. But when his hands are up, they're winning. When they're down, they're losing. Shows that there's an unseen hand at work. God's unseen hand is working in the background, and it's working. Look at verse number 12. It says, but Moses' hands were heavy. They took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and stayed up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the swords. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, look at this. It says, the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and rehearse it in the ears of who? Joshua. For I will utterly put him out of remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. So you see here, it was supposed to be, this is also a memorial. It's a memorial. It's supposed to be rehearsed in the ears of Joshua forever and throughout the wilderness. I want you to think about that. 40 years in the wilderness, they're out wandering. And Moses, from time to time, would have to remind Joshua, say, hey, that battle we won, that battle against Amalek, that was God. Guess what? That battle, that wasn't you. That battle was God. Guess what? Joshua, that wasn't your sword. Guess what, Joshua? That wasn't your strength. Hey, Joshua, that wasn't your ability. But that was the Lord. And time again, Moses, that's what the Bible said. God told Moses to rehearse that in the ears of Joshua. Every time Joshua got the big head, and every time Joshua thought he was somebody and it was him and he'd done it, Moses rehearsed it in the ears of Joshua. So for years, he'd been reminding Joshua over and over, and he'd been saying, hey, it's not your strength. It's not your might. It's not your power. It was God helping. It was God guarding. It was God's ability. It'd do us some good just to do the same thing, rehearse it, say, man, that was God back then. That was God that helped you that time. It was God again. It was nothing that we've done. Everything that the children of Israel have done was owed to God. And it was all because of past victories. That victory was a huge memorial for Joshua's life. It even said it. They used the word memorial to describe that victory and said it needed to be rehearsed. And that's for years. Moses kept saying, Joshua, don't get the big head. Joshua, you're nothing. It's all God. So then when we get to our text that we're in here tonight, in Joshua 5:14, it says, and he said, nay, but the captain of the Lord's host, I am come. And Joshua fell on his face on the earth and did worship. And said to him, what saith the Lord, my servant? Joshua hears the captain of the Lord's host. That's the same one they'd been rehearsing in the wilderness. The same one they'd been talking about over and over. The same one that had the unseen hand at work. So guess what Joshua did? He didn't have the big head. He just fell on his face and worshiped right in front of God. He says, God, you're the one that I've been talking about. You're the one. You know, his heart was right when that angel, when that captain come. It says, the captain of the Lord, when it came, Joshua fell on his face and did worship. You know, think about yourself. Why are we here today? Why are we here? Why are we sitting here on a Sunday afternoon? Why are we not out in the world? It isn't by us. It isn't by our might. It's all the Lord's. It's all His glory. It's because He seen fit one day to draw us by the Spirit and to save us and turn us from our wicked ways, to where we're not leading in a life of sin, and where we're not out cussing, we're not out drinking, we're not out living in the world. But He's seen fit to save us and change our heart and line up our heart with His heart. And you know, it's when you think about our past, the enemy was too strong, the valley was too wide, we was way too low. We was in a place of darkness and despair. Where in the world will we be without God? And where will we be without His goodness? God is so good. I mean, when we think about our past, some of the things that was mentioned here tonight, and how He's helped with cancer, and He's helped with surgeries, He's helped get through different things, different obstacles. I'll tell you, He's a good God this evening. And you know, we can rely on those past victories, those past things like we preached on this morning. We just need to cling to those. When you thought that you didn't hardly have another prayer to get through, and it somehow got through. We all got some kind of story to tell. But you see, number one, we've got the promised victories, but number two, we've got the past victories. You know, the God of the past is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God has not changed. The God that was here to help Joshua, the God that they rehearsed in the wilderness over and over and said, Joshua, He's the one that helped you. He's the one that did it. It's the same one today that I'm saying He did it. He's still good. And we all have a story to tell. We all have something. So you see the promised victories. You see the past victories. But lastly, you see the provided victories. That God is the one that provided the victory. You know, and it all took one man, and it took Joshua. And it took him believing, and it took him just accepting the fact that God can do it. Now, I want you to think about just a moment before we get into what happened. And I know you know what happened, but would we really accept the fact that God has promised us the victory? I think a lot of times we would say, yeah, we're going to be victorious, but then we'd have to think out our own strategy. We'd think out of our own way to do things, or can we do it this way? Can't we do that way? And you know, I think that really just prolongs God working and God moving and God being God. You know, if He says to do it this way, we got to do it this way. And the way He said is, look what He said. In verse 2, it says, And the Lord said to Joshua, I have given into thy hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor, that you shall compass the city, all you men of war, and go round about the city once, and thou shalt do 6 days. And the 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And on the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with trumpets. I want you to think about that. What a strange sight's taking place. All they're doing is marching and going around the city. You know, and it took Joshua just being obedient and doing exactly what God wanted them to do. You know, don't you bet some people is murmuring and complaining? I mean, that's all they did in the wilderness is murmur and complain. All they did that the whole time is after leaving bondage, just murmur, complain, and throw their hands up and bicker at Moses. And don't you think when they started marching around that city, that some of them started saying, my gosh, what's Joshua doing? Isn't he crazy? Why would he do this? I mean, he's going to get us killed. He's letting them know we're here. Not only that, they know we're here. But 1 day passes, they're doing that. 2 days pass, 3 days pass, and all they're doing is marching. But He's doing what God told them to do. And I'll tell you, we just need such a connection to God that we just obey Him and do exactly what He wants us to do. Verse 16 says, And it came to pass at the 7th time when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Isn't that what he already said in verse 2? Verse 2 said, The Lord said to Joshua, See, I have given unto thee thine hand Jericho. In other words, the Lord done promised you Jericho. And finally, after doing exactly what God said, in verse 16, it says, Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Verse 20 says, So the people shouted with the priests, they blew the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet. And the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So that the people went up into the city, every man a strange sight before him, and they took the city. What an amazing sight. I mean, it's a story that, you know, kids learn at a young age in Sunday school. But you know, God lets us do things, and God lets us go through things to where sometimes the only thing you can say is, He did it. That's all you can say. You can't take no glory, you can't take no credit for marching around a city and shouting. And shouting was what everybody could do. Everybody had a voice. Didn't matter how old you were, it didn't matter how feeble, how weak, or how strong you were, everybody could shout. And Joshua really didn't do nothing to win the battle. The battle was the Lord's, and it's His battle. So you see that we have a promise to victory. God has promised us a victory. I mean, how many times in the Bible has God promised us victory? We just studied Revelation in Sunday school not long ago here. He's promised us victory. We know we're going to be victorious. But you know, you think back to past victories and what we talked about this morning, and so many times that there's different markers and things that He's done. We need to hold to those past victories so when we get to the present, we get to the now, we get ready to go into that tent revival, we're thinking, man, can God do it? Well, He's done it before. He can do it again. But it ain't going to be by my might. It ain't going to be by nobody's might. It's going to have to be by Him. If we're going to see God move and we're going to see God do something, it's going to have to be Him. But you know, none of this would ever happen if somebody wasn't obedient and somebody didn't do what God told them to do. And that's what Joshua did. So we see the promised victory, the past victory, but you see God provided the victory. In that day and in that time, He provided the victory. And He provided in such a manner that nobody could take credit. And I'm thankful for what a God that He truly is. And I wonder this evening, just in closing, I just wonder in closing, as God promised you some victories, and He said that we're going to be victorious, and I wonder if you're like me, and you've heard you're victorious, but you don't really celebrate, your faith didn't celebrate before it happens like it should. You know, I read that in that book, and that really stuck out to me. But that's what Joshua did. He celebrated. He took the fact that the Lord had given them the city in verse 2. You know, we need to celebrate in the fact that we are victorious. Don't worry about the things that's taking up place. Know that He can and know that He will. And even if He don't, the worst thing that can happen to me is be put in a grave. But guess what? I'm still victorious. I'm still going to be in His presence. But He's provided the victory. How important are those past victories? I mean, they're so important. But you know, whatever you're up against right now, I'd say if we used to really know everybody's heart and we put it on a projector up here, every single one of us has some things, some issues going on, and some things that we're praying about, and some things that you're just wanting God to just come through on. You're wanting God to provide a victory in your life. You're going through something and you ain't told nobody, you may not even told a spouse, but you're wanting God to provide in a way, and God to provide something for you. Well, He can. And if you just got to rely on the fact that He's promised us to be victorious, and rely on the fact that in the past He's provided victories. And He will help us, whatever we're going through. I just wonder this evening, can you search your heart? I mean, what are you going through? Is there something that you may possibly be facing? Maybe it's just something private. You don't want to let nobody in on. You know, I can think of some things in my life that I just want to take this time here and just give to God and say, God, You give me direction. You provide the victory, and I'll give You all the honor and all the credit. I don't feel the need for a piano or anything. Just your head bowed and your eyes closed for just a moment. Just the altar's open.